One. This is the second part of our session with Dr. Yisrael Levitz. We're going to be speaking today about, in more detail, about how the quarantine and isolation affects couples. So let me start with a basic question. Why do you think that marriages in isolation make us worried more than at other times?
Well, this is a time of great uncertainty. And whenever there's uncertainty, there's high anxiety. So anxiety and other emotions are running very high. And in addition, or as part of it, there's a tremendous financial insecurity that many people are experiencing, losing jobs, not knowing what the exit of all of this is. We also know from previous disasters that the year following a disaster or a natural catastrophe, there is a tremendous increase in divorce. I think I mentioned this in the first section of our discussion. And we know that even here in Israel, there is an uptick in domestic abuse. Shelters, I understand, are full. We know that reports from China are that the government agencies that are in charge of divorce, they're overwhelmed. So we can expect that to happen here. These are not normal times, and couples that are sequestered with one another, and particularly those who had difficulties before this crisis, many of them are going to end up in divorce court.
Oh, could you specify a bit more, like, what you think happens to couples? What are the dynamics that affect marriages during the quarantine?
Well, it very much depends on the couple and their pre-corona relationship. I've spoken to couples who have told me that this is a wonderful time for them. It's almost like being sequestered on an island together, and they're growing together, they're dealing with issues. I had one mother tell me that she's dreading the time when this is going to be over and her kids are going to have to go back to school and her husband to work. She is really enjoying this period. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case for all too many couples who are finding that the combination of the stress of having children to deal with all the time, the financial pressures, very often sick parents and grandparents or members of the family. It's just too much. And if it's a couple that has not learned how to make decisions together, how to organize their lives. These are couples that are living in chaos. And we had one case that was reported from a group that I'm working with. I'm working with a group of volunteers, of graduates of our Family Institute. One of the therapists reported that there was a couple that just couldn't get along. They decided that they were going to live in separate rooms, that they were going to have a time when each of them would be able to prepare food in the kitchen. There was a baby. The baby stayed with the mother. She prepared food at her time. He prepared food at his time. And it was Pesach time, Passover. And he had his Seder in his room. She sat in her room with the baby and cried all night, she said. they decided to call the therapist. Therapist, and I'll talk very shortly about the kinds of interventions that we do, but the therapist was able to help them kind of climb down from the tree that they climbed up on. And within about 3 to 4 sessions, the following happened. She was able to bring down the anger. She was able to help them connect with one another. And we'll talk about some of the methods that she used. She was able to get them to walk out of their room at one point and just give each other a hug and then go back to their room. They came out of their room, they gave each other a hug, and they both started to cry. And they were connected. By the next time they called, the next time she had a session with them, they were both baking a cake together in the kitchen and just having a great time. Now, I could just see where a negative experience like this without intervention could have ended up in divorce court. They just didn't know how to break this, this horrible cycle that they created. And they would have both carried this experience for a long time. These are some of the examples. This is one example of some of the things that we're coming across.
Do you have some other ideas about the kinds of stresses that couples are dealing with now?
Well, if there are unresolved issues, couples might begin to deal with those issues and not know where to go, and it just becomes very explosive. So they always carry issues from the past. Keep in mind that couples who have unresolved issues or couples who have stress in their marriage, they tend to find a way to maintain an equilibrium. That might be with one of them working 70 hours a week and basically being emotionally divorced or separate, but it maintains the relationship. They may buffer their relationship with friends and always be together with friends. Now, neither of these strategies can work very well when they're sequestered away from the world and they can't escape. So those are some of the things that trigger the kinds of crises that we're seeing.
So now, couples who are already in treatment, they can continue, with Zoom with their therapist. But couples who find themselves in distress now and call a therapist. So could you talk about some of the strategies that a therapist should consider that could be helpful?
Okay. Let me just mention this helpline task force that we've put together with the graduates of the Family Institute. We have 15 therapists. All of them have gone through the Institute training. All of them have advanced degrees. All of them have gone through extra training in family therapy. And when we talk and when I supervise them, I'm working with a very limited objective. It can't be family, it can't be couples therapy as usual. We don't have the technology. The technology doesn't lend itself to the same kind of work that we can do when a couple calls up in distress.
Right.
So it's a combination of crisis intervention and coaching and being very directive. To a great degree, it could be categorized as a lot of cognitive and behavioral interventions. The objective, we have two objectives, because this is not long-term counseling, even though many of the same methods of working with couples still apply, but the objectives may be a little different. The objectives are Number one, to stabilize the relationship, lower the tension, kind of detoxify them. And the second is to increase positivity. Once we increase positivity, we're moving the trajectory of the relationship from one that's just filled with pain to hopefully one where they can begin to see some positive aspects of the relationship.
Uh-huh.
I might as well mention, Dr. Flashman, that some of the things we don't work with is where we find there's physical abuse, where there's addiction, where there is this severe pathology, or as we have come across in our work with the helpline, where there's an ongoing affair. These are red flags that we watch out for, even if we're doing regular therapy. These are it's something that we don't do as couples, and we follow those guidelines here as well.
Right. So now, you're talking about strategies, but you made everybody curious with that very dramatic case that you described before. Can you talk about the specific interventions that could be helpful there or in other cases that you?
Sure. Well, we firstly do want to know what the couple has in mind when they call. What's their objective? What would they like to see happen with this counseling structure that we have? It's pretty much the same question that we would ask any couple. Why they are coming now? What is it now that makes them come, and what is it that they expect? We try as much as possible in this first phase to reduce the toxicity, and these are some of the things that we suggest. Firstly, we teach a couple, we have the couple focus on periods of time in their relationship, if there were any. Most often there is periods of time in their relationship when things were positive. We ask them, were things ever any better than they are now? Could you describe them? Can you tell us what that was like? As a couple begins to reminisce about more positive times, something happens, probably both physiologically, but certainly emotionally happens. It brings a balance into their perception of their relationship. Yeah, things were better the first year before the baby. Well, what was better then? What was it like? Or things are better when we go away on vacation, or things are better when we're able to be by ourselves and not visiting family or in-laws. Whatever it is that they can come up with, we ask them to describe it clearly. What is it that goes right at that point in time? And that's one of the approaches. That there is a need, most often, to teach the couple very directly how to reduce some of the stress. We might suggest exercise, deep relaxation, breathing, take a break, sit and write. If you feel that you're really getting upset, if the both of them understand that if they begin to discuss an issue now, it's not going to lead to a good place, they should understand, let's take a break now, let's talk about this later. And each of them can then go and begin to write. As you write your feelings, you're bringing them into a cognitive realm. And that kind of buffers the intensity of the feelings. And more often than not, once feelings are put on paper, and thought through, then when they come back to it, it's a lot softer than it was initially. We might teach them ways in which to express their feelings with basic communication skills, not being accusatory, starting off with what you need and what you feel. It depends on whether the couple is able to take that in at this particular point in time. But we teach them ways of reducing the negativity and finding ways of being able to talk with each other in a non-toxic way. We also strongly suggest that they not deal with some of the hot issues in their marriage at this point in time. It only brings up the tension, and as we know from some of Gottman's research, when heart rate goes up above 100, something closes down in the frontal cortex, and people are just not able to think as rationally as they normally can. So we ask them to just put it aside. They could make note of it. After this is over, we can find a way, probably through therapy, to help the couple to work these things through.
Mm-hmm. In the care line, are you speaking to each separately or to both of them together?
It's a good question. It depends on how the case presents itself initially. We have individuals who call and say, I don't want, interestingly, thus far it's been mostly men, I don't want my wife to know I'm calling. The objective of the therapist who's working, as we discussed it, is in fact to try and bring the wife, the mate, in. Sometimes it's just not possible. I really don't want my wife to know that I called. And in such an instance, we just try and work with the individual
Mm-hmm.
as best we can. Optimally, there are different ways in which to bring a mate in. Can I write your wife an email explaining to her that I'm seeing you, that I'm speaking with you, and that I think that I'd like to hear her voice and not just the voice of somebody speaking on her behalf. Right. People usually respond to something like that, or I would, with permission from whoever it is that whichever mate I'm speaking with their permission, I would make a phone call and make the same request. When working with couples, normally, I've had great success in being able to bring the mate in. However, from time to time, it can't happen. So you just work with what you're able to.
Right. So, when you talked about positivity, that sounded very appealing. Do you have some other techniques that you would want to mention that help to increase positivity?
Well, bringing in positivity is possible once the negativity has been brought down. There are a number of ways. One method we use is to have the couple focus on what they appreciate in one another, mm-hmm. And to be able to express it. One of our therapists used a technique of asking the couple to describe, this was a younger couple, I think it's more appropriate for a younger couple, to be able to describe a fantasy relationship, a fantasy marriage, and a fairy tale marriage. And they began, each of them, to describe it. And while they were in this fantasy state, the therapist was able to ask them very direct questions. So if one of them said, I want to live in this, I'm living in this beautiful palace, and I have help all over, etc., etc. And the therapist asked, and my husband loves me very much. And the therapist asked, which is more important to you, the beautiful palace or your husband loving you? And being able to, because it turned out that her beautiful palace and her fantasy of having a lot of material wealth was getting her husband very nervous. So the therapist was very keen in asking the right question. And after kind of teasing out the important elements of the fantasy, it turned out that both of them really wanted a greater closeness and intimacy and warmth and support from one another. So these were some of the interventions. We do assess each couple differently. Some couples live in chaotic structures. They're either in their pajamas all day, or they don't have any private time or private space. They don't have any activities for their children, and we try and help them structure it. That's the directiveness of this particular approach. It's not the way we normally work. We work with many more dynamics besides just coaching and crisis intervention. But given the circumstances, this is what we do these days.
Now, when you look ahead, because you're having experience now with couples who are experiencing a crisis right now, and do you think that they could emerge stronger, or do you think that most of them are going to need further therapy after the interventions from the care line?
If I were to project, I think that most of them will probably need further therapy. Many of them are calling us because they simply don't have money. And when they see free couples counseling, they see this as an opportunity. We do try and hold their expectations in line with reality, that we're here to help you get through this critical period in a way that both of you can find a better place for yourselves in your relationship. We don't we never do promise anyone, even regularly, that we're going to help you solve all of your issues. But if we reach a point after 3, 4, 5 sessions, which we envision as being pretty much as many sessions as we can give with this kind of intervention, the next step would be to help the couple to get to a place like the Family Institute, where money is not something that stands in the way of people getting help. There are couples who, like this couple that I mentioned previously, who basically had a fairly good marriage, a fairly stable marriage. I think they did have issues, but they may be able to go for a number of years without some of their issues arising again. But I think most of the couples that call, I think they will need further therapy.
Right. So part of the care line is to get them ready for that. In other words, to make some steps to stabilize, then to recognize that there's a need for something that has more time, more space, and more continuity.
Very much so. Very much so.
Right.
There are things that we're not doing. We will ask a couple, we'll let their narrative unfold. We'll try and delineate some of their core issues. But we're not going to we're not going to deal directly with any of their long-term issues. And those will remain after Corona leaves us. We do want to get a sense, determine their commitment to the marriage. But unlike a regular therapy session, for example, it's not that we wouldn't do it, but it's not a part of our protocol. We wouldn't attempt to assess their knowledge of each other. You know, Gottman speaks of his love map. I love his popular labels of how well each knows the other's intimate psychological world. That's something that we would do in regular therapy. We need time to do that. Here, it's not to be the focus. A therapist will maintain some of the same process as in a regular therapy session, to control escalations, to create a working alliance with the couples, to validate and reflect and clarify, and if possible, even to develop some sort of a reframe so that the couple sees their issue to a great degree as having been exacerbated by this corona crisis. And hopefully we can get them to a better place. We're right in the middle of our work now. We just started actually a week ago or 10 days ago. And cases are slowly coming in, and the caseload is building. And we're getting more experience with the kinds of cases that are coming in, so that after the crisis, we'll be wiser than we are right now.
Well, let's hope we don't have the shlav bet, as they say in Israel. You know, the cycle comes back. But yeah, there will be more ready for it if we do.
Well,
Oh,
hopefully.
it's a wonderful innovation and a great community service. Do you have any other comments that you want to raise in this discussion?
Uh, well, we didn't talk about children, but I do know that you have a video coming up, or that you've already done on parenting.
Hmm.
But it is something on our team. We do have somebody who counsels couples with regard to parenting issues, and she's had some work in the last week of couples who, in addition to issues between them, they wanted some help with regard to parents. Um, Look, I think that a therapist still has to be a therapist, still needs to know how to manage a session, even if it's online, and just keep the objectives clear. And hopefully we can be helpful.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. And um, I'm sure that our listeners have gained a great deal of inspiration and information.